James Rhodes came to tell me about his voracious love for Leeds facts. He tells me how the book On This Day in Leeds came about, and he was so lovely he gave me a copy of it. I was very pleased. This week on Light on Leeds, our lovely guest is James Rhodes. Hello.
Hello, good morning.
Thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
So, James, I know about you because you're just a mine of information about Leeds on Twitter.
Yes.
But I know that you've also written books about Leeds.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did you get into your obsession with Leeds
My
facts?
obsession. Well, I'm born and bred in Leeds. Grew up here, was schooled here, live here now. Generations of my family on both sides are from Leeds, so we've Leeds going back in the blood for centuries. But and I've always been interested in history, and I've had a great pride in Leeds and Leeds United, and not just anything to do with Leeds has always interested me. But really, what started me off with the writing, and I've always been a bit of a frustrated writer, but never really found a voice, if you like, what to talk about. But what started me off really with writing was doing family history and researching these ancestors, as I say, all lived around Leeds. And I used to collect bits of information, little press clippings or register entries, but I had nowhere to sort of keep it all in one place. So I decided to set up a blog. And then I would use that as almost like a filing system. I would write little stories about ancestors.
A good idea, yeah.
And just because it was somewhere to put it, and I could send it to my cousins and look what I found about great granddad or something like that. So that's how I started doing it. And then I was very close to my grandfather, my mum's dad, when I was growing up. And he had similar interests to me, and he sort of nurtured love of things like cricket and history and family history. We used to traipse around graveyards together and stuff like that. So and he died when I was about 22, and I didn't really know much about him and his life, and he served in the Second World War like everybody in that generation, but he never really talked about it. And we just knew a few little anecdotes, a couple of little stories that he used to tell, but nothing. It was all very innocuous. Didn't really say anything about what he did. And so I became slightly obsessed with trying to work out what happened. What did he do? Where did he go? So I sent off for his RAF record, and I started to piece together from little clues, little places that he'd been, and found the ship that he'd sailed around to Africa on, and things like that. So I started again compiling all this into a few blog posts, and then that became a book. I wrote a book about his life, and it's really quite fitting that we're sitting here in Beeston doing this, because he was born in Beeston, and my grandma was born in Beeston. They all lived and grew up in these streets around here. And my granddad was born in a street called Hoxton Terrace, which was demolished 40 odd years ago. And it's right on the corner of Wesley Street and Elland Road, opposite the Billy Bremner statue. It's now a matchday car park. And he was born in 1920, which is the first time Leeds played in the Football League. He was born about 3 weeks before their first league game. So it kind of started from there, that writing all about my ancestors and their lives in Leeds then got me into, so what was Leeds like when they were growing up, and going further back in time, what finding out that I still had ancestors here during the Civil War and things like that.
Wow.
Whose side would they have been on?
Yeah.
So I think it was that. It was trying to just picture what life was like for my ancestors in Leeds. What was Leeds like then? That got me then thinking more widely about Leeds. And I started, so that's really where it started. Mm-hmm. And as I say, I was putting all the stuff that I was collecting, the stuff that I didn't think anybody would be interested in other than perhaps my immediate family. And I was putting it on the blog, and I started sharing bits and pieces on Twitter, and people actually started to be interested in some of the stuff I was writing. So I then thought, well, actually, it's a shame to just limit it to just my family. I mean, it's a bit boring for people generally. But so I then started widening out into wider stories about the history of Leeds, and it kind of snowballed from there. And then I sort of set myself this crazy challenge 2 or 3 years ago of thinking, well, can I come up with something new for every day? Something. And so I started thinking, well, it's the anniversary of whatever coming up, I'll write about that. And then I thought, well, actually the day after that, it's the anniversary of something else. And so I then started this daily, on this day, such as in 19 whatever or whatever, that I started doing, this is what happened. So that started from there. I started doing this on this day in Leeds. And as I say, it became a bit of an obsession. I have that slightly obsessive tendencies. So I then, once I'd started doing it, and I'd done, like a few days in a row, and I was thinking, well, I'll keep this going now, and surely I can't really do it for a full year.
That's what I was thinking. Did you never have days where you woke up and you struggled?
There were days when, because I always made sure that I had something ready to go.
Yeah.
I used to have it timed so it would post automatically at 6:30 on the relevant morning. But there were times when I'd come home from work and I'd have my tea and I'd be ready to go to bed, and I'm thinking, I haven't really got anything for tomorrow. And there was part of me that the sort of sensible part of me was thinking, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. Nobody's going to shoot me if I don't. But there was that the obsessive side of me that said, oh no, I need to find something. So and I would, and my go-to source when I was really struggling was the British newspaper archive online, and so I could search for particular dates in the Leeds newspapers. And a good source of information I was really struggling was the in memoriam, the personal columns, particularly around either side of the wars. Mm-hmm. Talking about people who were killed in service in Leeds, and that would give me something to write. But there were nights where it's like 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm thinking I should go to bed, but I need to get something for tomorrow. Anyway, I managed to do a full year, and then by the time I'd done it, I'd accumulated quite a big following on social media. So I thought, well, it's a shame that I've done this. I've got all this information, so I put it in a book, and so I published On This Day in Leeds, which has got, I say, at least one story for every day. There are some days when there's 2 or 3 things that I've found. So there's probably about 750 different stories throughout the book. So and it was, I have to say, when I'd finished, it was a relief to not have that
and
pressure.
Not to wake up and think, what happened today?
Yeah. But then, as I say, by the time I'd done that year, I'd got a bit of a following. People were genuinely interested, and I found that there was a real interest in local history. That I think history comes more to life when you have a personal connection with the place. And what a lot of people would say was, if only we'd been taught this sort of history in school, I would have been much more interested in it.
Yeah, because it's closer to you, isn't it?
Yeah. So I kind of, from there, what I've then done in subsequent projects, or tried to do, is to take a big historical topic but try and look at it from a local perspective.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah.
So I've done quite a lot on the English Civil War, and how was it being played out in Leeds, what impact did it have in Leeds, and that's helped me. It's not actually a period of history I knew a great deal about. I mean, I'm not a historian. I don't have any particular qualifications. So that helped me, got me interested in it, and then I've been able to talk about that and write about that and other similar topics, and it kind of started from there, really. Oh,
brilliant. Well, I think I'm happy that it did. It was great to read all those facts about Leeds. So were you telling me that, so your granddad was born and bred in Beeston, and he was a bit of a historian himself?
Well, yeah, he was he was a policeman, but that was his trade, but he was very interested in local history. And he, after he retired as a policeman, he started writing a history of Beeston, and I remember, he used to spend an awful lot of time at the library, and he'd be a member of the Thoresby Society.
Oh, yeah.
And he would spend a lot of time accumulating knowledge, pictures, newspaper articles, old books about Beeston. And he was writing this book for as long as I could remember, but he sadly died, and he'd never finished it. So I've got at home a massive box full of his papers, his research, loads of files. There's no structure to it, and it, one day I would love to just be able to take the time to actually sort through all of this, try and make some sense of it, and if possible, write the book that he never got to finish. And I've brought with me just a selection of his notes. It's just pages and pages of A4, and it's all written in this copper plate handwriting, all in longhand. But there are notebooks, literally loads of notebooks full of these kind of notes, and just trying to get it into some sort of order. And I've started, so the stuff that I've brought with me, I've transcribed a lot of it, and a lot of it's on my blog already. But it's something that I keep going back to. But really, I suppose I feel like that's continuing that sort of legacy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I wonder if that's sort of where you got your interest in history and gathering it all together from your granddad, which is lovely.
I think I probably did, and as I say, he'd done a lot of work on his family tree, and I've got the notes that he made for that. And I suppose as a kid, it didn't really interest me as a kid. But it obviously planted a bit of a seed. Because as I say, I do remember, as a small child, he'd be walking around graveyards looking at gravestones with him as a kid. And that's something that's planted some sort of seed.
Yeah, definitely. So when you've been going through some of your granddad's notes, have you found anything that's sort of surprised you so far, or...?
I think the thing that's the nice part about doing it was that, as I said, he'd left me little anecdotes of his war, but we couldn't. They didn't have any context. They didn't really make any sense.
Right.
And I think what was nice about my sort of research was actually being able to put this into some sort of context. So being able to, once I'd got his war record, it didn't give much detail, but it gave me enough. There were just sort of places, dates, transfers, so you could track his movements, and then that led me down to the National Archives in Kew. To then look, I could get the units that he served with. They had all their diaries.
Oh, wow.
So that then led me to be able to find out on a day-to-day basis what. Although he himself isn't mentioned, I could see what the movements of where his unit was going from time to time.
Yeah, of course.
And it then led to I discovered somebody whose father had served in the same unit in North Africa.
Wow.
At the same time. Now, unfortunately, his father was suffering very badly with dementia, so he couldn't really remember anything or give any sort of coherent context to it. But his son had some photographs, and although my grandfather wasn't in any of them, they made sense in terms of what I'd read. The unit that he was with was he was a driver with the RAF, and the unit that he was attached to in the desert, their job was to go and find Allied aircraft which had crashed in the desert, and then recover them, put them, hoist them onto the back of a truck which he would be driving, take them back to this particular base where the mechanics would then try and get them into airworthy condition, and then they'd be transported off to wherever to serve again. So these old photographs that this chap's son had, showed these vehicles, with the cranes and putting the. Now it could be that my granddad's, in the driver's cabin in one of because you can't see. But whether he was or he wasn't, it kind of didn't really matter, in the sense that it just helped it bring to life, what he was doing. But we didn't know any of that. He'd mentioned that he served at one point with Leonard Cheshire, who was the VC when he was married to Sue Ryder, and humanitarian. He was one of the most decorated pilots of the Second World War, Leonard Cheshire. And we thought, what on earth was Grandad doing with Leonard Cheshire? But I've managed to find, again, by cross-referencing my granddad's war record with Leonard Cheshire, I found that the point at which they intersected, and they served together at Marston Moor, which is near York, for a time when my grandfather was going through his apprenticeship, and Leonard Cheshire was at that time a pilot instructor at the base. And the really sort of spooky thing about the Marston Moor connection was that when I was learning to drive, the Marston Moor airfield had been turned into you could go and drive on it, and there were road markings, little roundabout. I think actually it still is. It's an off-road driving, and my granddad took me to drive when I was learning to drive. So I remember vividly, driving with him on Marston Moor airfield. But he never mentioned that he'd served there. It was about 7 or 8 months with Leonard Cheshire, and it was a time when there was a big air raid on Cologne at the time he was there, and a lot of the Halifax bombers set off from Marston Moor at that time. But of course he never mentioned that, and I suppose he will have had his reasons why he didn't really want to talk about the war years, but it was just so these little connections. So he said, was there anything surprising about it? I think that probably was the thing that most surprised me.
And I suppose as well, because you were talking about you've been looking into the Civil War and sort of Leeds part in that. I wonder if it comes round again, because Marston Moor, wasn't that a place where there was a big... Yeah,
that's right. So you're absolutely right. So just up the road there was the Battle of Marston Moor in 1644, I think. And that was the big decisive battle in the north, at least. The Civil War itself still rumbled on down south, but in the north, that was the defining moment. So there's all, and in fact, as part of the research for the book, I went out to Marston Moor again and just wandered around, and I took the opportunity to go and look at the battlefield. There's a memorial there, so that's all these little
comes round again. And so you wrote a book about your granddad's journey through the war. And what's that called?
So that's called Gangi's War. I called him Gangi. I think I couldn't say granddad when I was a kid, so he was known as Gangi. So the book is Gangi's War. It was, as I say, the title reflects the fact that it started out as an attempt to recreate where he was during the war, but it turned into a full sort of biography, really. About his life growing up here in Beeston, and when he meeting my grandma, whose family were all in Beeston, so it dealt with all of that as well. And just driving here to meet you this morning, I drove past all of these places. I drove past, as I came up Elland Road, I went past where he was born, went past the end of Marley Terrace, which is where my great-grandparents on my grandma's side all lived. Before that, they were at Noster Terrace. I passed there as well. So all of these places, as I'm driving up, are all very familiar. And in fact, this the room that we're sitting in here has a very, very similar layout to where my great-grandparents lived. So just being here just reminds me of so that was in Marley Terrace, the house that I'm referring to, which overlooks Elland Road. At the time, and when I was a kid, my great uncle was still living in that house. So on match days, we would go and park on Marley Terrace at Uncle George's house, and we'd pop in, say hello, have a cup of tea, and then we'd go walk down the hill to the match. So Beeston has quite a strong emotional pull, and is part of the inspiration for, indirectly, it's what kind of got me into doing what I'm now doing.
Beeston's got quite a strange. I don't know a lot about it, but I know it's got quite a strange history. I think it was a town, was it, before Leeds was actually a place itself? Yeah,
it does have a very ancient history, an ancient past, and to be fair, my granddad was the expert on Beeston, and I only what I know about Beeston's history is really what I've picked up from just trying to make sense of his notes. But and I think there was historically there was a lot of the boundary between Beeston and Middleton was hotly contested. I think there was a duel.
Was there?
I think there was a duel in the woods, in Middleton Woods, and I think that you can still see there's a bit of a dike that runs along, and that was supposed to mark the boundaries between these two warring families.
I think we should keep that tradition going.
So there was that, and then another little snippet which I love from reading Gangi's notes was that there was an old medieval chapel in Beeston called St Leonard's.
Oh, right.
And St Leonard's had an anchoress. Now, I didn't know what an anchoress was, but an anchoress is a religious devotee, usually a woman, hence the anchoress, who is walled up inside the church, and it's supposed to be the ultimate act of devotion, and there was no way in or out. They were literally walled up inside, but there's just a hatch that food and drink would be passed through.
Oh my gosh, it's awful.
So for probably a couple of hundred years, in the sort of 13th, 14th century, there was an anchoress in St Leonard's Chapel in Beeston, and people used to leave legacies to the anchoress to support her.
To keep her fed when she's stuck behind the wall.
And I think there was a certain amount of I guess it's one of those things where you get your reward in heaven, kind of.
Right.
It was this it seemed to be the ultimate act of devotion. So just all these, and I think it was on the site of St Mary's Church. I think that's where it was originally, and I believe that part of the masonry from the old church is actually in the arch of the doorway in the current church. I could be wrong on that, but I think that's my understanding. And these are just things I just sort of picked up from reading these notes, really.
Well, it sounds like they're a treasure trove.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I think it would be nice ultimately to get the time. It's probably a task that I'll have to spend in my own retirement, really, because it's what I do is it's a bit more trivial in the sense that I'm just picking up facts and just throwing them out on a tweet. There's no real structure to it. I don't have to worry about creating a big narrative that all makes sense.
Yeah.
I can just take a bit of trivia and just do a Facebook post or a tweet, but what he was doing was what I would call proper history. And people do sometimes refer to me as a historian, and I slightly cringe at that, because I think that I don't think that's what I'm just somebody who's obsessed with Leeds, and I just I like to share little bits of trivia.
It's good that you do, because other people are not doing it, and otherwise you wouldn't find out.
Yeah, and I think that's probably fair. I think what I have found is that there isn't anybody else doing what I do, in the sense of, I suppose I'm slightly popularising it. I know there are lots of very, very good, what I call proper historians, doing a lot of great work, and I think if I can do anything, it would be to draw people's attention to that. Get people, if people see something I've tweeted or put on Facebook and think, actually, I quite fancy a trip to Army Industrial Museum or something like that, then I think, well, that's what this should be about. It's not really, I've not really got much to say, but I hope it fosters an interest. Yeah, in the same way that, as I say, my granddad has planted some sort of seed, and which is now growing a long time after his death. But
I just think it's great to know. I mean, I absolutely love living in Leeds, hence the podcast, and I think it's fantastic to find out history, and I think you should always know. I think it's really important to know sort of where you came from, to be able to know where you're at and where you're going. And just from doing the podcast and the little bits and pieces I've found out about Leeds has been really fascinating to me, and it really gives you like a rounded idea of everybody and about what sort of city it's always been.
Yeah, and I think especially for me, with having, I'm very proud of the fact that when I look back through centuries of my family tree, they're all from Leeds, or very close to Leeds. On my father's side, so the Rhodes line, that started really sort of out in Baildon, but it kind of slowly moved down the valley with Baildon, then Idle, then Carveley, Rodley, Farsley, which is where my dad was from. So they've gradually sort of moved slowly further and further into Leeds, and it's it's been really interesting, and that's the Rhodes line and the different line. So again, it's been interesting charting that particular, and so I'm quite I think that's probably why I'm so obsessed and proud of Leeds, because I think it's part of my identity.
Personal to you.
And if other people are interested, which some people seem to be, then great.
Definitely
share it.
So your book On This Day in Leeds, how long did it actually take to write that?
Well, I mean, it took it took almost exactly a year, because I was to start with, I was really only one day ahead of myself. It was very much flying by the seat of my pants. And so I started that in sort of early June, a couple of years ago, and by about Christmas it got to the point where I thought, well, I think I can do this. I got halfway through and I thought, actually, I can't stop now, I've got to do it. So I had some time off work over Christmas, which then gave me the opportunity to actually spend some time getting ahead of myself, and writing it all in advance. And so it was probably around about the February-March time where I'd completely finished the year. And then it was just a case of just tidying it all up and putting it in a format that I wanted to make sure that every day had a complete page to itself. So that meant either trimming stuff down or adding stuff in. But so it really took from sort of June to the end of March to have it done. And then, as I say, it was such a release to have done it. And it was, it was. I was very proud of it. I've always been a bit frustrated writer, and I'd written Ganges War, but it was only quite a short book. Whereas On This Day in Leeds is like a full-length book, and so I was very proud to hold that in my hand. And, well, actually, because it's always been something I've wanted to say. But it's about 75,000 words long. If somebody said to me, I've got to sit down and write 70, it would just seem so daunting. But because I've been doing it like little bits here and there, a day at a time, it ended up writing itself almost.
And have you got any plans for writing any other?
Well, I'm still going with the right. So I do what I call the story of Leeds at the moment, and I've been it's been a bit more structured. I've been going chronologically through the history. I started in about 350 million BC. It was all a bit ridiculous, because I wanted to somehow get the story of millstone grit,
right?
And all the stonework, and so that's kind of where I started, just as an excuse to get that in. And I've got up to around about the end of the 19th century, so I'm getting quite close to the end. And I do that twice a week. I thought I can't do another thing where I'm committing to doing it every day. So twice a week is manageable.
And is that, can people access that in a blog?
Yeah, well, I do it on I've got a Facebook page which is Rhodes to the Past, and then Twitter it's History of Leeds. Well, if you search for History of Leeds, it's actually at Rhodesy with a 0, but History of Leeds. So I do that on Twitter and Facebook Tuesdays and Fridays. But it's got a bit like it did with On This Day in Leeds. I don't necessarily know where I'm going next. All I know is that I've got so much material, and it is roughly chronologically ordered, that I can now just pull things down and just post them. But I'm up to part 67, I think, was yesterday. And I don't know where I'll be by the time this is broadcast, but I have no idea. If you ask me how many parts it's got, I have no idea.
No.
It would just be... and I think that's what I quite like. I don't like the... I think it helps not to think I must do 100 parts. Or
I think so.
It's just, it will be what it is. And I guess that when that's done, I'll perhaps put that collate that into another little book. But I feel as if that's, for me, that's the best way of doing it, rather than actually sitting down with a blank sheet of paper and think, right, I've got to write 100,000 words on. It's too daunting, and it's not really how I don't have that. I'm not a historian, so I don't really have that ability to sit and create an entire narrative history of. I prefer the just throwing random bits and pieces and trying to fit them all together.
I think that's a good way to do it. Do you get much? Do you get many comments? And do you get like? Do you get people who are sort of saying, "I don't think this is true"?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, and you know, I get things wrong, and I'm very happy when people correct me because that's all part of the process. This for me is a learning, but I'm not trying to teach history.
No.
I'm learning it, and it's my way of look what I found out, and then so I'll get things wrong. People will correct me. Sometimes people correct me in a rude manner, but most of the time people are happy to point out politely that I've got stuff wrong. So yes, that helps to improve the quality of the material I've got. But a lot of the time, particularly with the story of Leeds, I'm getting slightly more up to date, and so I'm doing stuff about buildings, various buildings that might be still standing, or I'm starting to talk about histories of companies that were formed in sort of Victorian era, which either might still be going or have been going long enough that people, my mum used to work there, or so now we're getting up to a point where there are more personal connections with stuff that I'm posting about. So, and again, that adds another dimension to it. And that I think that for me, that's the really important part, because it's having that personal, emotional connection to something. And then if that sparks interest in somebody, then they share their memories, and that's all part of.
It's a way of getting it out.
It's all part of the process, yeah.
Because there were so many big companies, weren't there, that were huge in Leeds, and that so many people worked for. So I'm sure it must be lovely for them to sort of reminisce. And think of themselves as part of it. Yeah, well, the most recent one I did, I said at the time of recording this, was George Bray, which started off doing gas burners and lighting systems. They started in the sort of mid-19th century, and a version of that company was still going until the early part of this century. So I think 2005 it was bought out by an Italian company and then unfortunately closed down in Leeds. But so because I'm writing about a company that's formed in the 1860s but was still going in Leeds until 2005, I've got lots of people sharing their memories of working there, or photographs. That's great, isn't
it? So that's all for me. That's all part of the fun.
It's like an extra element.
Yeah,
that's lovely. So we always ask people our famous 3 questions. So the first one that I'll ask you is, what do you think is something that is great about Leeds?
Well, I mean, you'll have gathered from our chat that I think everything about Leeds is great. I think for me, the personal connection, the fact that I feel very proud to have this centuries-long connection with Leeds through Manchester. But I think, I'm still. What's great for me is that despite the fact I've been obsessively doing this for years, almost every day I'm still learning things that are new.
Yeah.
And I think Leeds is a place that's big enough and has enough of a history to allow for the fact that you can always make new discoveries. There's always new stories to tell, but it's still small enough to have a personality of its own right.
Yeah.
The fact that we're a one city football club, for example, I think we're just about the largest city in Europe with one football club.
I hadn't realised the significance of that until I was thinking about the motto, "We're all Leeds, aren't we?" And I think it might have been my son I was talking to, and he was explaining that to me, and I was like, I would never have thought of that. Yeah, and I think so that helps create an identity. You're not defined by are you City or United, are you Liverpool or Everton? You all Leeds, aren't we? That I think so. That's and I think that helps to forge an identity. I think a lot of people will say that Leeds does have its own personality, its own identity. So I think that's one of the things that I do like about it. And what would you say is something that is not so great?
Well, I mean, I suppose everybody will moan about the traffic, the lack of a public transport system.
Yeah, it does come up a lot.
I mean, that's I commute in and out of Leeds and it's terrible. So there is that. I heard Chris Nixon when he was on with you recently, and he talked about how the council's sort of desecration of some of the historic parts of Leeds, and I I share that sense as well. In fact, there's a documentary that Alan Bennett did about Leeds and its architecture, it's called Building Sites, and he makes a similar point. The programme's actually about County Arcade, which is his favourite building in Leeds, and obviously it's now been beautifully done up as part of the Victorian Quarter. But he's making the similar point, which is that when he first went to Italy and visited Venice and Florence in the 1950s, he says in the documentary, I couldn't work out why this all looked so familiar until I realised that a lot of the Leeds architecture was inspired by Florence, Venice.
You can really see that when you look up.
Yeah, so Tower Works and St Paul's House in Park Square. There's various buildings that have that sort of they're inspired by, and so the theme of this is this thing by Alan Bennett is about how in the 1960s and 70s we just that just a lot of that just got destroyed and replaced by just concrete monstrosities. So I think that is a shame. There's a lot of stuff that's obviously gone forever, but I think on an optimistic note, there are signs. There are various projects going on, like the restoration of the White Cloth Hall on Kergate, for example. The Corn Exchange is really nice. Hopefully there might be a bit of better sense, and the Majestic building being done up for Channel 4. And hopefully that's being done sympathetically. So maybe there's signs that things might change. Yeah,
it does feel like there's not so many sort of carbuncles because occasionally stand in Leeds, you think, like who gave permission for that to be built? Why is it there? It looks so terrible and jarring against all the other buildings. But in general, what I like about Leeds, I think they do really well modern and old buildings next to each other. That I think works really well as a nice mix. We seem to be out of the thing of just knocking everything off.
I hope so. And the Leeds Civic Trust do a good job of sort of policing what's going on. So I hope that we've learnt a few lessons from previous developments, but it remains to be seen. I suppose one other thing that's just a quirky thing for me about Leeds is I wish it was closer to the seaside. Yeah,
do you know exactly? It's my only thing that I don't like about Leeds is that it's not close enough to the seaside, and that you feel like, if you want to go to Scarborough, my family live in Malton, so we spend even just trying to get to Malton in the summertime is a nightmare because everyone's going to Scarborough as soon as the sun shines. But I totally agree, that is the only thing.
I mean, we try every year and have a week or at least a few days at the coast, either North Yorkshire or in Northumberland. So if Leeds was on the seaside, then I think it would be
perfect. Leeds by sea.
Yes.
And if somebody was a long-term resident of Leeds and they felt like they knew everything about the sea, can you tell us about something that you think is a hidden gem that they might not have heard of?
Hidden gem, well, and I'll use again from a personal connection, and I've spoken a lot about Gangi in this chat, but a place that he used to take me to, which is I think still a hidden gem, is Addledam Nature Reserve, which is at the back of Golden Acre Park, on the other side of the back of the lake. And when I was a kid, it's owned by the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, and when I was a kid, the entire reserve was enclosed by high, like 6 to 8 foot high fencing, and it was locked, and it was only accessible if you were a member of the trust and you had a key. So there weren't that many key holders, but I was a junior member, so Gangi arranged for me to have a key, and we used to go, and one of the other interest that he nurtured in me was bird watching, and so we used to go, and we'd go and we'd lock ourselves in, and there were various hides. There was a little area of marshland, and then there was a lake, and woods and fields, so these various hides dotted around with the little different habitats, and we'd go, and almost always we'd be the only people in the reserve, and spent many happy hours there. And then when I got a bit older and old enough to go on my own, I would go on my own, and I would literally have the place to myself. So it was like my own little private wilderness. It's now accessible to the public. It's still owned by the trust, but it's not it's not fenced off and locked, so it's more accessible. But it's still, in comparison to the multitudes that go to Golden Acre Park and go and feed the ducks but never go any further, or go to the cafe or whatever, it's still very quiet. You can still have those moments where you go in and you're completely alone and you're just watching a kingfisher that's just right outside the hide. Or I remember one evening watching a family of fox cubs playing outside. So things like that. It's still, so there are these little pockets of wilderness. The Rodley Nature Reserve is another one. Kirkstall Valley. There's and I like the fact that one of the things, many things I love about Leeds is the countryside is actually quite close at hand. So there are these little places that you can visit. But I would say Addle Dam has a particular personal connection for me.
Well, I'll definitely go and have a visit.
Great.
Thank you so much for coming along.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Light on Leeds, what's happening in this great city? Light on Leeds, we'll tell you. But wait a minute.
Great to hear James share his love of Leeds history and his stories of his grandfather who sparked his interest. Music this week is the gorgeous track Star Sailing by The Star Sailor.
Been sailing all around the stars, failing, I'm covered in scars. Been praying, it's not too far. Maybe just one more star. Been hoping, counting the days, floating slowly through space, holding out for that place. Maybe just one more star. Maybe